Amara was a young woman who had known nothing but hardship all her life. Born into poverty, she had spent most of her days working tirelessly to support her ailing mother, who had grown weak over the years. Their small, crumbling house barely provided shelter, and each day was a battle to find enough food to survive. Despite her struggles, Amara remained kind-hearted and hopeful, believing that someday fate would smile upon her. The villagers, however, were not as kind. She was often mocked for her worn-out clothes and the way she scavenged for work. The young men in the village saw her as nothing more than a burden, unworthy of marriage. No one wanted to be tied to a girl who had nothing to offer except responsibilities. Amara had long accepted that her life would be spent caring for her mother, with no one to share her burdens. One afternoon, as she fetched water from the village well, she overheard a group of women whispering about an unusual proposal. A wealthy family in the neighboring town was desperately searching for a bride for their only son, Damian. The rumor was that he was blind, and because of this, no woman was willing to marry him. Many believed blindness was a curse, a sign of bad luck that could bring misfortune to an entire household. Despite his wealth, Damian remained unmarried, and his family was growing desperate. Amara's heart pounded as she listened. A marriage to a rich man could change her and her mother's fate forever. It wasn't love she dreamed of, but security. A chance to escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped her since birth. Yet, the thought of marrying a man she had never met, a man who could not even see her, filled her with uncertainty. When she told her friends about it, they were horrified. They warned her against making such a sacrifice, telling her that there must be something deeply wrong with Damian for so many women to refuse him. Some claimed he was not only blind, but cursed, while others whispered that his family was hiding a terrible secret. But Amara had no choice. With her mother's health worsening and no money for medicine, she saw only one path forward. That night, she made up her mind. She would marry Damian, no matter the consequences. If wealth could buy her mother a chance at a better life, then she was willing to take the risk. The next morning, she approached the town's matchmaker and offered herself as a bride. Within days, the arrangements were made. Amara, the poor village girl, was about to become the wife of a man she had never seen, a man no one wanted. What she didn't know was that her decision would lead her to a truth far more shocking than she could have ever imagined. When Amara arrived at Damian's grand estate, she was overwhelmed by its sheer size and beauty. The towering gates, the perfectly manicured gardens, and the lavish mansion all felt like a world so distant from her own. She had never stepped foot in such wealth, and yet she was about to become a part of it. But from the moment she walked in, she felt an icy hostility lingering in the air. Damian's family did not welcome her warmly. His stepmother, Lady Veronica, barely concealed her distaste, eyeing Amara from head to toe with thinly veiled contempt. "So this is the girl?" she murmured, exchanging a glance with another relative. The way they spoke about her, as if she weren't even in the room, sent a chill down her spine. The days leading up to the wedding were a series of tests, subtle, cruel, and meant to make her feel small. The servants treated her coldly, refusing to acknowledge her as their future mistress. The family made her do tasks that a bride-to-be of a wealthy man would never be asked to do: cleaning, cooking, even serving them at meals. Amara bore it all silently, knowing that she had no choice. Lady Veronica was the worst of them all. She constantly reminded Amara of her poverty, making snide remarks about how a girl like her could never fit into their world. "You must be very desperate to marry a blind man," she sneered one evening at dinner. "Or maybe you think you can fool him since he can't see what kind of girl he's really marrying." The room erupted in quiet laughter, but Damian remained silent. Then, the moment Amara had been both dreading and anticipating arrived, her first meeting with Damian. She was led into a dimly lit study where he sat calmly in a chair by the window. He was nothing like she had expected. He was handsome, with sharp features, thick dark hair, and a composed demeanor that exuded quiet power. His eyes, though unfocused, were striking, and for a moment, Amara found herself staring. "Amara," he said, his voice smooth yet unreadable. "You must be overwhelmed." She hesitated before answering. "A little." He smiled faintly. "You don't have to lie. I know my family isn't making this easy for you." She was taken aback. Though he could not see the way she shifted uncomfortably, or the nervous way she clasped her hands, he seemed to sense it. It was as if he could read emotions instead of faces. That moment made Amara uneasy in a way she couldn't explain. There was something about Damian, his calmness, his intelligence, the way he seemed to notice everything despite his blindness, that unsettled her. Yet she had no other choice. Her mother needed this, and so, despite the warnings in her heart, she chose to go through with the wedding. The day of the wedding arrived, but instead of joy, Amara felt an uneasy weight pressing down on her chest. The grand estate was decorated with gold and ivory, filled with guests dressed in expensive clothes, whispering behind their gloved hands. They were not here to celebrate love, they were here to witness a spectacle. As she walked down the aisle in the luxurious wedding gown that was chosen for her, she could feel their eyes piercing into her, full of judgment and curiosity. Why would a girl like her marry a blind man? She must be after his wealth. Doesn't she know the rumors about him? Their hushed voices echoed in her ears, but she kept her gaze forward. This wasn't about love or acceptance. This was about survival. Damian stood at the altar, dressed in an elegant black suit, his expression unreadable. Unlike the restless guests, he remained perfectly calm, as if he knew something they didn't. His hands were folded in front of him, his posture relaxed. It was almost unnerving how unaffected he seemed by everything. When she finally reached him, he leaned in slightly and whispered, "I know what they say about me, but you will learn the truth soon." Amara's breath caught in her throat. His voice was steady, but the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. What truth was he talking about? What was there to learn? She wanted to ask, but before she could, the officiant began speaking, and soon she was uttering the vows that would bind her to this man forever. Damian took her hand, his grip firm and steady. For a blind man, he held her with certainty, as if he could see her. A strange feeling crawled up her spine, but she swallowed her doubts. When the ceremony ended, applause filled the air, though it lacked warmth. Amara turned to look at the crowd, expecting to find smiling faces, but all she saw were eyes filled with curiosity, suspicion, and pity. As the newlyweds greeted guests, an old man with deep wrinkles and sunken eyes suddenly grasped Amara's wrist. His grip was stronger than she expected, and when she looked into his face, his expression was one of urgency. "Be careful, child," he muttered, his voice raspy and filled with warning. "Things are not always what they seem in this house." Before she could react, a servant rushed in and pulled him away, apologizing profusely. "He's just a senile old man, my lady," the servant insisted. "Pay him no mind." Amara watched as the old man was led away, his eyes still locked onto hers, filled with something that looked almost like fear. Her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what she had just stepped into, but something told her that this marriage was not going to be what she had expected. As the night deepened, Amara found herself standing at the threshold of Damian's vast, dimly lit bedroom. The walls were lined with dark wooden panels, and the massive four-poster bed was draped in deep red velvet. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner, casting flickering shadows that made the room feel both warm and ominous. She swallowed hard. This was it, the beginning of her new life. A maid gently nudged her forward before bowing and closing the heavy doors behind her, sealing her inside with her husband. Damian sat in a large armchair near the fireplace, his fingers slowly tracing the rim of a wine glass. He seemed relaxed, almost as if he had been waiting for her. The silence stretched between them. "Are you afraid of me?" Damian's voice was smooth, but there was something about his tone, calm, measured, yet laced with something unreadable. Amara tensed. "No," she replied quickly. Damian turned his head slightly in her direction and smirked. "You're lying." A shiver ran down her spine. How had he known? She clenched her fingers together and forced a small smile. "Why would I be afraid of my own husband?" Damian took a slow sip of his wine. "People fear what they don't understand." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Amara shifted uneasily, taking in her surroundings. The bed was untouched, the room too perfect, too controlled. Her heart pounded as her gaze returned to Damian. She had seen blind men before, men who struggled to move without assistance, who reached out hesitantly when they walked. But Damian was different. He sat with effortless grace, his posture perfect, his movements precise. He had poured his own drink without spilling a drop. It was almost as if he could see. The thought unsettled her, but she brushed it away. Maybe he had just learned to navigate the world differently, relying on his other senses. Gathering her courage, she moved towards the bed, her hands trembling as she pulled back the heavy sheets. She expected Damian to rise, to follow, but he didn't. Instead, he remained seated, sipping his wine, listening. "Sleep well, Amara," he murmured, his voice carrying a strange finality. She hesitated, looking back at him, but he didn't move. His expression was unreadable, his blank eyes fixed somewhere beyond her. Taking a deep breath, she lay down, pulling the covers over herself. The room was silent, except for the crackling fire. Yet, as she lay in the dark, her heart raced. Something about Damian, his confidence, his knowing smirk, the old man's warning, made her stomach twist with unease. As her eyes fluttered shut, one thought refused to leave her mind. What exactly had she married into? Amara's breath hitched as she pulled the covers over herself, trying to calm the storm of unease swirling inside her. The silence of the room felt heavy, pressing down on her. She was just about to turn to her side when she heard it, the soft sound of movement. Her heart pounded. Damian stood up, not cautiously, not like a blind man feeling his way through the dark, but smoothly, effortlessly, and he walked, perfectly, towards her. Amara's body stiffened. How does he know exactly where I am? She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her mind raced for an explanation, but nothing made sense. She watched in horror as Damian approached her side of the bed, his steps unwavering, his posture confident. He stopped just inches away, his face unreadable. Then, in a low, calm voice, he spoke. "You are my wife now. You deserve the truth." Before she could react, Damian reached up and with one swift motion removed his dark glasses. Amara gasped. His eyes, those deep, piercing eyes, were perfectly normal. No cloudiness, no sign of blindness. Damian could see. Amara's pulse thundered in her ears. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She wanted to step back, to put distance between them, but her body refused to move. Had he been lying all along? Had everyone been deceived? And more importantly, why? A slow smirk formed on Damian's lips as he watched her, truly watched her, for the first time. "You look surprised," he murmured, his voice dangerously smooth. Amara felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't just a lie. This was something much deeper, much darker. And she had just married into it. Amara stumbled backward, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Her mind struggled to process what she had just seen, what she had just learned. Damian could see. The man she had just married, the man she had believed to be blind, had been deceiving everyone, including her. Her voice trembled as she finally found the strength to speak. You can see." Damian didn't flinch at her reaction. Instead, he exhaled softly, tilting his head slightly, as if studying her, truly studying her, now that he no longer had to pretend. "Yes," he said simply, his voice steady, almost eerily calm. Amara's hands clenched at her sides. "So it was all a lie? You made everyone believe you were blind?" His eyes remained locked onto hers. "I never made them believe anything," he corrected smoothly. "They assumed. I simply didn't correct them." Amara felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. "Why? Why would you do that?" Damian sighed and walked past her, his movements still unsettlingly precise. He poured himself a glass of water from a crystal decanter, taking his time before answering. "Because people show their true selves when they believe I'm blind." He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Do you know how many women wanted to marry me for my wealth, only to abandon me the moment they found out I was blind?" Amara's heart pounded. She had heard of women marrying for money, but this was something else entirely. Damian continued, his voice quieter now. "They thought blindness made me weak. They pitied me, saw me as something less than a man. I needed to know if there was someone who would accept me without seeing me as a burden." His gaze softened, though it did little to ease the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "And then there was you." Amara's throat tightened. She wanted to believe his words, but the betrayal stung too deeply. "But you lied to me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "How am I supposed to trust you now?" Damian took a slow step forward, his gaze unwavering. "I never lied about who I am. You saw me as Damian, not a helpless man. You spoke to me without pity. You didn't try to manipulate me or treat me differently. That is why I chose you." His words should have meant something, but all Amara could feel was confusion. She had thought she was marrying a blind man, a man who needed her, but now she wasn't even sure who Damian really was. A part of her wanted to run, to escape this twisted reality, but another part, the part that had always fought to survive, needed to understand. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Damian's lips curled into the faintest smile. "Now, you decide if you want to be my wife, knowing the truth." Before Amara could fully process Damian's confession, the heavy bedroom doors flew open with a loud bang. Lady Veronica stormed in, her face twisted with fury. The elegant, composed woman Amara had seen earlier was gone, replaced by someone seething with rage. "You fool!" she spat, striding toward Damian with terrifying speed. Before Amara could react, Lady Veronica's hand flew through the air and landed on Damian's cheek with a sharp slap. The sound echoed through the room. Amara gasped, stepping back instinctively. Damian didn't flinch. He stood still, his expression eerily calm as he rubbed his cheek. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Lady Veronica's eyes burned with fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You just destroyed everything." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. Everything. She looked between them, realization dawning in her mind. Lady Veronica knew. This wasn't just Damian's deception. His entire family had been in on it. Amara's voice was shaky as she spoke. You knew he wasn't blind?" Lady Veronica turned to her, eyes cold and unforgiving. "Of course I knew," she scoffed. "I was the one who made him pretend." Amara felt the ground beneath her shift. "But why?" Damian exhaled slowly, his gaze never leaving his stepmother. "Because as long as I was blind, she could control everything." Lady Veronica's jaw clenched. "And for good reason." She whirled toward Amara, her eyes full of venom. "Do you think a blind man could manage this family's wealth? Do you think the board of directors would trust him? No. But a helpless, blind heir, that they would pity. That they would leave under my control." Amara's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about an inheritance. This was a lifetime of manipulation. Damian's voice was quiet, but firm. I let you control everything for years, Veronica. I let you think I was weak. But it ends now. Lady Veronica's face twisted into a snarl. And you chose her to be your partner in this rebellion. She glared at Amara with disgust. This pathetic, desperate girl who married you because she had no other choice. Amara flinched at the words, but Damian's voice cut through like steel. She is more worthy than you ever were. Lady Veronica let out a bitter laugh. You have no idea what you've started. She turned on her heel and stormed toward the door, but before leaving, she threw one final look at Amara. You should leave while you still can, girl. You have no idea what you've married into. The door slammed shut behind her. Silence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Amara turned to Damian, her mind spinning. What have I just become a part of? Damian met her gaze. A war, Amara. One that's only just begun. That night, as the grand estate settled into an eerie silence, Amara lay awake in bed. Damian had fallen asleep beside her, his breathing steady, but her mind refused to rest. The weight of the night's revelations pressed heavily on her chest. Then she heard it. Whispers. Faint, hushed voices slithered through the darkness, creeping under the door. Amara stiffened, straining to listen. The voices came from down the long, dimly lit hallway. Her pulse quickened. Something felt wrong. Carefully, she slipped out of bed, her bare feet making no sound against the cold marble floor. She eased the door open and peered out. The flickering candlelight from the wall sconces cast long shadows, making the house feel even more ominous. Following the murmured voices, Amara crept toward Lady Veronica's study. The door was slightly ajar, allowing her to see inside without being noticed. What she heard made her blood run cold. We should have gotten rid of him years ago. Lady Veronica's voice was sharp, filled with venom. The fool ruined everything by revealing the truth. But it's not too late. His death will be blamed on an accident, or perhaps his new wife. She laughed coldly. Amara's breath caught in her throat. They were planning to kill Damian. Another voice, lower and unfamiliar, spoke. Are you sure, my lady? He may suspect something. Lady Veronica scoffed. He's blind. What can he possibly do? By tomorrow, he'll be dead, and all his wealth will belong to me. Amara clamped a hand over her mouth, her heart hammering. She had to warn Damian. Spinning on her heels, she ran back down the hallway, her mind racing. The woman she had just married was in mortal danger. She had to get him out of here before it was too late. As soon as she re-entered the bedroom, she shook Damian awake. Damian, she whispered urgently. His eyes fluttered open. Amara, what's wrong? She grabbed his arm. It's your stepmother. I heard her. She's planning to kill you. Damian, however, didn't seem surprised. Instead, he sighed and sat up slowly, rubbing his face. I know. Amara froze. You already know? Damian turned to her, his expression unreadable. Veronica has been trying to kill me for years. Amara felt a chill crawl down her spine. He continued, his voice calm but cold. She's the reason I lost my eyesight as a child. She poisoned my food, slowly weakening my vision over the years, hoping I'd never be fit to inherit anything. But I figured it out. Amara's breath hitched. This was deeper than she had ever imagined. Damian looked at her, his gaze serious. That's why I faked blindness. I needed her to believe she had won. But now she's growing desperate. Amara swallowed hard. What do we do now? Damian's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. We play the game, and we make sure she loses. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the grand estate, but inside, tension ran high. Amara sat beside Damian, her heart pounding as they finalized their plan. He remained calm, his face unreadable, but she could feel the storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. Are you sure this will work? She whispered. Damian turned to her, his lips curling slightly. She's desperate. She'll make a mistake. Amara nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. She had never been part of anything like this before, but she knew there was no turning back now. That evening, the family gathered in the grand dining hall for dinner. The chandeliers cast a warm light over the long table, adorned with expensive china and crystal glasses. Lady Veronica sat at the head, her eyes scanning Damian with thinly veiled satisfaction. She thought she had won. Amara played her part, keeping her head down, pretending to be nothing more than the obedient new bride. Damian, too, kept up his act, his gaze unfocused as he blindly reached for his utensils. The tension thickened when a servant entered with a special dish, setting it in front of Damian. Amara's stomach twisted. This was it. Lady Veronica smiled sweetly, pouring a glass of wine for Damian. "A special drink for my dear stepson," she said smoothly. Damian reached for the glass, but hesitated just slightly, as if unsure of its position. Lady Veronica's eyes flickered with impatience. She reached forward, subtly dropping a tiny vial's contents into the drink. Time seemed to slow. Damian's hand shot out, catching her wrist mid-air. Gasps echoed through the room. Lady Veronica's eyes widened in horror as Damian's gaze locked onto hers, clear, sharp, and full of fury. "You," she stammered, trying to yank her hand away. "You wanted me blind, weak, and helpless," Damian said, his voice deathly calm. "But I see everything now." The entire room fell into stunned silence. Before Lady Veronica could react, the doors burst open, and several officers stormed in. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud," one of them announced. Lady Veronica's face contorted with rage. She turned to Damian, her voice a furious hiss. "You set me up!" Damian's expression remained unreadable. "You did that to yourself." An officer pulled her hands behind her back, securing them in cuffs. She thrashed, screaming that they would regret this. But the truth was out, and there was no escaping it now. As they dragged her away, Amara felt her legs weaken, the weight of everything crashing down on her. Damian turned to her, his gaze softening. "It's over." Amara exhaled a shaky breath. "Is it?" Damian reached for her hand, his grip steady. "It's just the beginning." The estate felt different in the days that followed. Without Lady Veronica's cold presence lurking in the shadows, there was a sense of relief in the air, like a dark cloud had finally lifted. The staff moved more freely, and even the once solemn halls seemed brighter. Damian stood by the balcony, staring out at the vast gardens below. The wind ruffled his hair, and for the first time in years, he felt free. No more pretending. No more hiding. Behind him, Amara stepped forward hesitantly. She had barely spoken since the confrontation. Damian turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "For everything." Amara looked at him, her emotions a storm of confusion and understanding. "You lied to me," she admitted. "You tested me without my knowledge, and yet I still don't know whether to be angry or relieved." Damian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just needed to know if someone could love me for me, not for my wealth." Amara studied him carefully. The man she had married wasn't just the mysterious blind heir she had met days ago. He was so much more. Strong, intelligent, and deeply wounded. Damian took a step closer. "I won't force you to stay, Amara. You deserve a choice." He reached into his pocket and placed a legal document on the table between them. "If you wish to leave, half of my fortune is yours. No tricks, no tests. You can walk away and never look back." Amara glanced at the papers, then back at Damian. "And if I stay?" Damian swallowed, his voice softening. "Then we start over. No lies, no secrets. Just us." Silence stretched between them. Amara looked down at the papers again. Then, without hesitation, she pushed them aside. "I married you thinking you were blind," she said, her voice steady. "But now I see the real you. And that's the man I want to know. Damian's breath hitched, and for the first time, true emotion flashed in his eyes. He reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "No more pretending?" he asked. "No more pretending," she agreed. A warm breeze swept through the room as they stood there, hands clasped, hearts open. There was still so much to learn about each other, so many wounds to heal, but for the first time, there was no fear, only hope. As they stepped out onto the balcony together, the golden sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the estate. Neither of them knew what the future held, but one thing was certain. Their marriage had begun as a lie, but now it would be built on truth, trust, and second chances.